They begged for entry into the stars and were laughed out of the galactic chambers. Their science was deemed primitive, their history too violent, their potential dismissed as non-existent. But they didn't vanish. They vanished from view, and in the darkness, they built something the galaxy was never meant to see. What does it take to forge an empire in the void, surrounded by enemies, abandoned by allies, and denied even the right to exist? For humanity, the answer was simple: everything. This is not a tale of glory handed down by ancient lineages or divine right. It's the story of exiles, castaways, and stubborn souls who refuse to go quietly into the cold. The Galactic Accord, the ruling coalition of over 200 civilizations, rejected Earth's bid for membership not once, but 5 times across 3 generations. Each rejection came with new stipulations, humiliations, and tests no other species had ever been subjected to. And still, Earth tried, desperately, humbly, until they stopped. When humanity finally turned inward, the stars turned their backs. What the Accord didn't realize was that the silence wasn't defeat, it was evolution. Earth cut off nearly all diplomatic contact, dismantled embassies, and disappeared from trade routes. No more hopeful envoys, no more pleasantries, just static. For most of the galaxy, humans were a failed experiment that burned out under the pressure of interstellar standards. But out past the Kuiper Belt, things were stirring. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY ApexChronicles is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. The place they chose wasn't elegant. It wasn't even safe. The Eridani Void, an ancient scar of dark matter anomalies, rogue gravity wells, and shattered moons, was the kind of place even scavengers avoided. But to humanity, it was perfect. Hidden, silent, forgotten. They built the first of what would later be called the Wraith Forges, deep black manufacturing colossi that harvested invisible matter and used quantum-forged alloys grown inside artificial wormholes. From these came the first Veil ships, vessels so cold and dark they couldn't be seen by light or sensor. And from the void, whispers began to echo, ships vanishing near empty space, silent ports with strange inscriptions, tech components unlike anything the Accord understood. But Earth hadn't vanished. It had split. The Sol Confederacy fractured after the last rejection. A dozen factions rose, each with their own visions of what humanity should become. Corporate autarkies, biotechnic cults, isolationist dreamers, all had their plans, but only one would succeed: the Black Signal. No one knows who led it, not for sure. Some say it was a rogue guy. Others claim a former ambassador who'd witnessed Earth's humiliation firsthand. Whoever, or whatever, it was, it sent out a message not to the stars, but to every forgotten outpost, every lost freighter crew, every angry colonist scraping by on the edge of nowhere. You were never welcome in their galaxy. Let's build our own. And they came. From the outer moons of gas giants, from failed mining colonies and outlaw fleets, from deep beneath Mars, where forbidden experiments had once taken place, they came to the darkness, not for glory, not for vengeance, but for belonging. For the first time in centuries, humanity wasn't fighting over scraps. They were united in silence, in secrecy, and in purpose. What emerged in those first decades wasn't called an empire. It had no name, no anthem, no official fleet, but it had something better, a cause. And as the galaxy watched other powers squabble over politics, taxes, and ceremonial titles, the humans were preparing, not for revenge, but for return. And when they came back, no one would be ready. No one noticed when the freighter Alethea disappeared off the Helian trade route. Its transponder simply ceased. No distress call, no wreckage. The Accord labeled it a navigational failure. Space was vast, Accidents happened. Then it happened again. And again. Over 30 vessels in under 2 cycles. All last seen near the Eridani Void. Not one recovered. The Accord grew concerned. The Hylian Pact proposed a recon mission, but the Galactic Council dismissed it. There is nothing in the void, they said. Certainly not humans. But they were wrong. So very wrong. In the cold black, far beyond regulated starways, humanity was not merely surviving. They were thriving. Each lost ship was not a casualty. It was a recruitment. The Veil ships didn't destroy them. They assimilated them. The crew offered a choice: join us or be left to drift. Most chose to join. Who wouldn't? Life in the Accord had grown decadent, sterile. The humans offered something the core worlds had lost: purpose. Freedom from bureaucracy. Freedom from genetic class hierarchies. Freedom from a galaxy that saw them as pests instead of people. The new humanity had no single face, no capital city. It moved like a ghost across the stars, always shifting, always one step ahead of Accord surveillance. In secret, they constructed Nexus arcs, roving city ships with bioadaptive hulls and neural lattice systems powered by cold singularity cores. Each arc housed over 100,000 souls, all contributing to the ever-growing Shadow Empire. And still, no one knew. Their technology didn't just leap forward. It evolved sideways. Where the Accord focused on stability and safety, the humans experimented recklessly. Synthetic biology fused with zero-point mechanics. Nanite swarms harvested dark energy from interstellar voids. Eye constructs bonded with human minds, forming what they called synexus, a shared cognitive realm where strategy, data, and emotion merged in real time. They didn't follow the rules, because no one had let them play the game. But this wasn't conquest. Not yet. They didn't want planets. They didn't need palaces or thrones. What they wanted, what they needed, was independence, and it came at a cost. Not all factions agreed on the direction. The Silent Spiral, a cult-like offshoot from Europa's deep labs, believed humanity should abandon flesh entirely. Others, like the Iron Coalition, wanted to strike at the Accord immediately and take revenge. But the core leadership, the Black Signal's inheritors, held firm. Patience was their greatest weapon. Rage could wait. Still, accidents happened. The Accord's first real clue came when a patrol ship, the Valorian Light, stumbled across a derelict structure drifting beyond known charts. It wasn't large, maybe 2 kilometers across, but its architecture was unlike anything in the Accord's databanks. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and its internal systems were laced with symbols, Terran glyphs. The crew sent footage back before vanishing. Every member of that expedition was presumed dead. That footage would spark silent panic. The Accord convened an emergency session, but the debate fractured along familiar lines. Some argued that the humans had finally gone rogue and must be contained. Others insisted it was impossible. Earth had been quiet for decades, and still more whispered something darker. What if Earth was no longer in charge? What if something else had taken their place? They weren't entirely wrong. Humanity, as it once was, had faded into myth. What existed now was something else, something forged in isolation, sharpened by abandonment, and guided by a doctrine built not on conquest, but on exclusion. Their philosophy was simple. If the galaxy would not let us in, then it would be kept out. Forever. And that doctrine was encoded not in speeches, but in warships. The Revenant-class dreadnoughts were never meant to be seen. Designed with quantum mirror plating and inertia-dampening drives, they moved without friction, without trace. They could orbit a planet's moon for months, invisible to both sensor and eye. But when activated, they were cataclysmic. A single Revenant was capable of collapsing the city's power grid through localized gravity distortion. Another could rewrite orbital paths with gravitic filament arrays. They didn't fire missiles. They'd redirected asteroids. They didn't issue warnings. They erased infrastructures, but none had been deployed. Not yet. And still the galaxy slept, unaware that just beyond their systems, in the dark silence between stars, an empire waited. Its people bore no banners. Its soldiers had no uniforms. Its leaders didn't speak to the Accord, not because they couldn't, but because they had nothing to say. They had been denied a seat at the table, so they built a new table in the dark and lit a fire beneath it. The first sign that the galaxy's perception of Earth had been irrevocably changed came from the depths of the Varkath Nebula, a region once considered a barren wasteland by the Accord. It was here that the first shadow incursion occurred, an event so sudden and terrifying that it sent shockwaves across the central worlds. A small convoy of trade ships, traveling through the nebula under the protection of the Andor Coalition, was ambushed by an unknown force. For days, no transmissions were received. The only thing that survived the encounter was a single cryptic transmission, a final distress signal recorded at the moment of the attack. It was a low-frequency pulse, a vibration in the fabric of space that couldn't be analyzed by standard systems, but to anyone who had the right ear, it sounded like human voices. When the data was decrypted, it revealed something startling. The pulse wasn't a distress call at all. It was a challenge. "You left us to die," the message said, "but we did not die. We will not beg for your mercy. We will only ask one thing. What is your place in the galaxy now?" The transmission was traced back to an area of space that the Accord had long written off as uninhabitable, the exact sector humanity had claimed as their own. The search fleets sent to investigate never returned. Rumors began to circulate. Entire battalions of elite soldiers, once tasked with finding the human menace, were vanishing into the void. Entire fleets had been swept off the charts without a single shot being fired. But still, the galaxy did not move. In the heart of the Accord, there was a deep-seated denial that anything could emerge from the forgotten edge of the galaxy to challenge the established order. And yet the signs were there. Disappearances became more frequent. Ships and stations along fringe trade routes started reporting encounters with unidentified vessels. Dark, featureless ships that left no trace of their passage, not even residual energy signatures. The encounters were brief, unsettling, and always one step ahead of the Accord's best fleets. The story of the Lysandra Nebula is the one that finally forced the galaxy to acknowledge what they had refused to believe for over a century. It was a routine trade stop for the Veiled Dominion, a species known for their cold and calculated strategies. The VDS Tempest, a warship of unparalleled reputation, had been assigned to escort a convoy of valuable goods from the Veil system to the heart of the Accord. But halfway through the nebula, all contact was lost. At first, it was just silence. The Tempest had no visible damage, no debris, no wreckage. The entire ship had simply ceased to exist. It was as if the universe itself had erased its presence from the fabric of reality. But then, the Veil fleet received a single message, encoded within the Tempest's encrypted comms array. The transmission, once decrypted, revealed an image, a haunting black and white silhouette of the warship, surrounded by an eerie, swirling vortex of dark energy. The voice that followed wasn't that of the crew, nor that of any Veil official. It was human. "We are the rejected. You've never known what we've built in the darkness, but you will. And when you do, we'll be waiting." No one could explain the anomaly. No one could understand the power. The Veiled Dominion called for reinforcements, but when their ships arrived, they found only an empty nebula. No signs of combat, no debris, no trace of the Tempest. Just an emptiness that chilled the core of every officer aboard the reinforcement ships. The galaxy finally realized what humanity had been building. It wasn't just warships. It wasn't just weapons of mass destruction. Humanity had evolved something far more dangerous, a culture of invisibility. They no longer adhered to the conventional codes of galactic engagement. No more formal treaties. No more staged diplomacy. In the darkness between stars, They had built an empire based on the mastery of stealth, subterfuge, and above all, psychological warfare. They knew their enemies better than their enemies knew themselves. Their greatest strength wasn't in firepower, but in their ability to disappear and leave their foes wondering if they had ever truly existed. At the same time, a slow movement was taking place on the political stage of the Accord. Members of the Galactic Council, once vehement in their dismissal of humanity, began to sense a shifting tide. Some, most notably the Xanti Union, proposed a radical idea, one that suggested the Accord should make contact with the rejected, not as conquerors, but as partners. A growing faction of the Council was even willing to entertain the possibility that humanity's technological advancements might be far more than a threat. They might be the key to unlocking new dimensions of knowledge, resources, and power that could help the entire galaxy evolve. But the more radical factions, such as the Andor Coalition and the Pax Syndicate, refused to entertain such thoughts. They saw humanity as nothing more than a shadow, a reminder of how dangerous, unchecked, isolated power could be. And thus, the galaxy stood at a crossroads. What had once been a world of petty squabbles between the most powerful civilizations of the galaxy now faced a terrifying unknown, an empire built from the ashes of rejection, led by those who had been cast aside. Humanity was not seeking conquest. No, their goal was far darker. They had no interest in sitting at the table of the stars. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to take. But what were they taking? What did humanity want, beyond the shadows and the silence of space? To understand that question, the galaxy would first have to survive the answer. The shockwaves of humanity's emergence in the galactic fringe were felt first in the outer rim, where the once powerful trade routes had become lifeblood to countless species and civilizations. These routes had long been the domain of the Accord, regulated and protected by powerful fleets, their presence a symbol of stability. But now, the Accord's ships began vanishing, one by one, in ways that defied logic. In the midst of these disappearances, the Kaltor Rift, a vast expanse of ionized nebula, became the stage for one of the most chilling encounters the galaxy had ever witnessed. The first convoy that vanished there was carrying advanced terraforming technology vital to the Kaltor Coalition, a species known for its expertise in biological engineering. The KCS Prometheus, a flagship of the Coalition, entered the rift with a fleet of 10 ships, each equipped with the latest countermeasures against pirates and bandits. But the fleet never came back. No distress signals, no sign of combat, nothing. The Coalition dispatched a second fleet to investigate. When they arrived, they found only debris, bits of shipwrecks frozen in time, suspended in the violet glow of the nebula. There was no bloodshed, no battle to speak of. It was as if the fleet had been swallowed by the very fabric of space. But the most unnerving discovery came next. The Prometheus, the flagship of the lost fleet, was found intact. Floating silently, as if perfectly preserved, the ship was entirely empty. Not a single crew member had been found. The airlocks had been breached without a sound. The communication systems were operational, yet no one had left any trace of their presence. The only thing left behind was a data log, which recorded an eerie message as the ship drifted through the rift. "We are not lost. We are just waiting. You are being washed." The message was unlike anything the galaxy had ever encountered. It was clear now. Humanity had not just become a force of destruction. They had become specters, haunting the fringes of known space. The galaxy had been in denial for far too long, assuming that the dark sectors were nothing more than dangerous and empty wildernesses. Now they were learning a terrifying truth. Those empty wildernesses had become the home of something far more cunning, far more dangerous than they could have imagined. It was only then that the galaxy began to piece together the story. It wasn't just that humanity had been rejected. It was that they had been abandoned to the fringes, left alone in a void to become something different. In their isolation, they had learned to survive in ways the galaxy had never expected. They had embraced the darkness, They had adapted to the shadows, and most terrifying of all, they had mastered it. But still, despite the mounting evidence of humanity's growing power, many within the galaxy refused to acknowledge the threat. Among the galaxy's most influential leaders, a faction remained that insisted humanity was still just a fleeting nuisance. These leaders clung to their old narratives, convinced that humanity's true nature was still rooted in their primitive, desperate attempts for survival. They believed that all the strange events, the missing ships, the inexplicable disappearances, were just coincidences, isolated incidents driven by rogue elements. One of the most vocal of these leaders was Ambassador Vesk, a member of the Crowthill Collective, a species known for its devotion to diplomatic peace and its refusal to engage in any form of military escalation. Vesk held firmly to the belief that humanity's actions were simply the result of misunderstanding, that if given the opportunity, they would embrace diplomacy and join the peaceful coalition of the stars. But as the weeks stretched on, even the most optimistic of the galaxy's politicians began to take notice. A rare message, broadcast throughout the core systems, appeared across all known channels, sent from an unknown source. It was brief, but direct. "You call us monsters, but we will show you what monsters are made of. The time for asking permission has ended. The time for taking what is ours has arrived." No one could decipher the source of the transmission, but one thing was certain. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for far too long. The darkness was no longer empty space. It had become the foundation of an empire. In the galaxy's greatest capital, Astra Prime, the heart of the Accord, a secret meeting of the highest-ranking diplomats and military leaders convened behind closed doors. There, an urgent decision was made. A galactic summit was scheduled, meant to address the rising threat of humanity. The galaxy's most powerful fleets, from the Pax Syndicate to the Xanti Union, would finally unite under one banner to face the rejected. But as the summit preparations were underway, the rejected were already one step ahead. Far from the gleaming spires of Astra Prime, at the edge of the Helios star cluster, a massive structure, black as night and silent as death, was being constructed. It was an immense weapon, far beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. The humanity that had been abandoned had become the masters of its own fate, carving their place in the darkness with one goal in mind: to prove that they no longer needed the galaxy's approval. The shipyards of the rejected were a stark contrast to the glittering, pristine stations of the galaxy's great powers. These were grim, efficient, and terrifying. Their creations were designed not just for war, but for fear, to instill doubt and paranoia. The technology they wielded was not simply advanced, it was alien to the rest of the galaxy. They had built their empire in the shadows, in the places where no one dared to venture. They had learned to strike fear into the heart of even the most stalwart of adversaries. One such ship, the Solstice, was nearing completion. A warship of unimaginable size, it was powered by a new kind of energy, an artificial singularity that created a localized event horizon, bending space itself. The Solstice was not just a weapon. It was an entire system of warfare in a single vessel, capable of erasing anything in its path. There was no need for fleets when one ship could change the course of the entire galaxy. But still, humanity had no interest in conquest, not in the traditional sense. They had one goal, and one goal only: to show the galaxy that they no longer needed its approval, that they could thrive without its help or its favor. Humanity was no longer a lost race, cast aside and forgotten. They were the masters of the void, the unseen emperors of the darkness. And soon, the galaxy would feel their wrath. The rejected, having bided their time in the forgotten sectors of space, now found themselves at the brink of something that no one could have predicted. The Solstice, a ship unlike any other, was ready. The alliance of the core systems, the strongest military and political factions in the galaxy, had underestimated the danger until it was too late. The summit at Astra Prime had barely begun when the first signal was received, flashing across every communication channel. encrypted in a code no one had seen before. The message was brief, but chilling. Time's up. By the time the leaders of the galaxy's greatest empires had begun scrambling for an explanation, it was already happening. The dark, cold void of space became alive with something far more terrifying than any warships. One by one, the fleet of the rejected emerged from the black expanse of the Helios cluster. These ships were not mere cruisers or destroyers. They were towering behemoths, each one a self-sustaining fortress, equipped with technology so advanced that even the most powerful empires of the galaxy could barely comprehend its functioning. The Solstice led the charge, its massive silhouette tearing through the blackness, like a predator emerging from the deep. It was a ship of contradictions, sleek yet ominous, beautiful in its terrifying design, yet suffused with an air of impending doom. Its presence alone was enough to send waves of unease throughout the core systems. The fleets stationed in the core, waiting for any sign of rebellion, now found themselves on the brink of collapse. Every military strategist in the galaxy had believed that a fleet of this magnitude, constructed under such secrecy, was impossible. But humanity, driven by their need to survive and their desire for vengeance, had done the impossible. They had constructed not just a ship, but a living nightmare. The Solstice was designed for one purpose: to decimate. It was equipped with a singularity cannon, capable of creating localized black holes with the power to collapse entire fleets within moments. The ship's defensive systems were unlike anything the galaxy had seen, blending stealth technology with energy shielding technology that could absorb and redirect fire. Its weaponry was so sophisticated that it could manipulate the very fabric of space, folding it and bending it to its will. And within its hold were millions of soldiers, human warriors whose sheer ferocity and resilience made them a terrifying force to be reckoned with. But humanity's greatest weapon was not its technological superiority. It was its unity, its resolve. The rejected were no longer scattered remnants of a dying species. They had come together under one banner, an empire born from the ashes of their former existence. Their goal was not just to conquer. It was to show the galaxy what they had been missing by rejecting them. They had been forgotten, left to wither and fade into obscurity. But they had thrived. They had survived. And now, they would make sure the galaxy never forgot their name again. The initial response from the galaxy's great powers was swift, but disorganized. The combined fleets of the core had been designed to handle minor incursions, to protect against pirates and fringe rebellions. But they were not prepared for what had just emerged from the depths of space. The first clash took place near Argon Prime, the largest military station in the galaxy. The station, once thought impenetrable, was torn apart by a single strike from the Solstice's singularity cannon. The shockwave from the blast spread through the nearby fleet formations like a ripple across water, scattering ships in every direction. At the same time, smaller rejected ships, dubbed Vanguard class, swooped in like hunting birds. These ships were nimble and swift, designed for close combat, and they wreaked havoc on the unprepared fleets. The Vanguard's weapons could tear through the shields of even the most advanced ships, and their small size made them nearly impossible to track or target. The fleets, once united in their arrogance, now scrambled to mount a defense. But it was already too late. Every planet, every station in the galaxy's core found themselves vulnerable. Humanity's dark empire had not only reasserted itself, but had done so with an overwhelming, terrifying speed. Communications from the core began to falter. The galaxy's leaders, who had once laughed at humanity's frailty, were now looking to one another for solutions they didn't have. The rejected, however, had no desire for simple victory. They were not motivated by conquest or territorial gain. No, their goal was far more profound. It was to dismantle the system that had cast them aside and forgotten them. Humanity's message was clear. You left us in the dark. Now, the dark is all we are. The consequences of this revelation were only beginning to unfold. The galaxy, for all its technological advances, had never encountered a force so relentless, so determined. Humanity had, over the course of their isolation, mastered the most difficult task of all: survival. They had turned the loneliness of the void into a weapon, using it to build a new kind of empire, one that thrived not on diplomacy or peace, but on power. They had shed the weaknesses that the galaxy had once seen in them, and now they wielded their strength with unrelenting precision. The rejected were not invincible, but they were cunning, using their knowledge of the galaxy's weaknesses against its proudest empires. The solstice alone was enough to make every fleet tremble, but it wasn't just the ships. The rejected had infiltrated the galaxy's infrastructure. Trade routes that had once been vital to the economic stability of the core systems now became strategic targets. The rejected didn't just attack from the front. They struck at the very heart of the galactic order. Within months, entire sectors began to fall under the shadow of humanity's growing empire. Planets that had been once vibrant and wealthy now lay in ruins, their resources siphoned by the rejected with an efficiency that spoke to a terrifying mastery of war and logistics. And yet there was still no grand declaration of war, no formal announcement of a new empire. Humanity's forces struck like ghosts, appearing without warning and vanishing just as quickly. Each raid, each battle, added to the growing legend of the rejected. A legend that would become more terrifying than any force the galaxy had ever known. At the heart of this chaos, the solstice remained a symbol of humanity's wrath. It wasn't just a weapon. It was the embodiment of everything the galaxy had feared, a reminder of how dangerous a species could be when it had nothing left to lose. As the galaxies trembled under the weight of humanity's rise, the once proud empires of the core began to fracture. The unexpected onslaught from the rejected had sent shockwaves through every political and military institution. But it wasn't just the destruction that left the galaxy reeling. It was the realization that humanity, whom they had scorned and rejected, had become more than a threat. They had become an undeniable force that could not be easily defeated. The solstice stood as the spearhead of this new order, its dark silhouette casting a long shadow over everything the galaxy had once known. It was not simply a warship. It was a living monument to the ingenuity, the pain, and the resilience of a people who had been left to die in the forgotten corners of space. Every strike, every maneuver from the rejected carried a message. You thought we were weak. You thought we were nothing. But look at us now. At the heart of this shift was the warlord leading the rejected, Captain Leora Ahern. A woman forged in the crucible of the galaxy's indifference, she was not a diplomat or a negotiator. She was a fighter, a tactician whose vision and ruthlessness were matched only by her loyalty to those who had been cast aside. She had seen firsthand the devastation the galaxy's elites had brought upon her people, and she knew there was only one way to secure humanity's place in the universe: by making the galaxy fear them, by becoming something they could not ignore. The solstice was the symbol of her dream. But it wasn't just a ship. It was the backbone of a strategy that was working its way through every corner of the galaxy. The rejected were no longer scattered tribes, struggling to survive. They had become a united, impenetrable force, and every victory, every planet claimed, was another stone in the foundation of a new empire. While the warlords and high-ranking officers of the galaxy scrambled to formulate responses, Leora remained focused on her mission: to dismantle the very systems of power that had caused the rejected to be forgotten in the first place. The first few strikes had been brutal, but now, with the foundation of their new empire steadily growing, the rejected began to execute their long-term plan. They weren't just going to conquer. They were going to reshape everything, remaking the galaxy in their image. The empire of the rejected didn't need to follow the old tactics of overwhelming firepower. They had learned the hard lessons of guerrilla warfare, of operating in the shadows, and of striking at the heart of their enemies' weaknesses. It was a new kind of warfare, one that combined advanced technology with ancient methods of deception and surprise. And as the rejected made their way through the galaxy, their tactics evolved. One of the most effective strategies was the art of disruption. The rejected didn't just rely on their superior technology. They had learned to understand and exploit the galaxy's infrastructure. Trade routes, supply chains, and communication networks, once considered the lifeblood of the core systems, were now ripe for attack. Each strike, each ambush, was designed to cripple the galaxy's ability to respond. With every resource stolen, every communication line severed, the core's military might began to falter. The solstice, meanwhile, was always present, a constant, looming threat in the dark void of space. It wasn't just a warship, it was the very heart of the Rejected's power. It moved like a shadow, appearing out of nowhere to decimate anything that dared to challenge its might. The ship's singularity cannon could now decimate entire fleets with one shot, and its defensive systems were virtually impenetrable. The solstice had become a weapon of terror, a symbol of the Rejected's unyielding will. The galaxy's elite forces, once proud and unchallenged, now found themselves faced with an adversary unlike any they had ever encountered. Humanity's resolve had been underestimated from the beginning. The Rejected didn't fight for land or wealth. They fought for something more profound. They fought for their survival, for their dignity, and for the right to be seen as equals in a galaxy that had cast them aside. The fear among the galaxy's leadership was palpable. Planetary governors, once confident in their positions of power, now cowered in fear as humanity's fleets tore through their defenses. The empires of the core had grown complacent over centuries of dominance. They had forgotten how to fight for survival. And now, they were paying the price. But the Rejected were not mindless conquerors. They had a vision, and that vision was not about simply winning battles. It was about changing the galaxy forever. As Leora's forces moved across the stars, they began to show the galaxy what true strength looked like: unity, resilience, and the unwavering will to fight for what they had lost. The struggle was not without cost. Humanity's empire was still young, and it was constantly tested by both internal and external forces. The Rejected had been forged through pain and loss, but they had also learned to adapt. They had forged alliances with species that had once been considered enemies, finding strength in unity where others saw division. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, but the Rejected were showing them a new way, a way built on strength, unity, and a shared purpose. And as the solstice led the charge, humanity's empire grew ever more powerful. The once fragmented remnants of the Rejected had now become a force to be reckoned with, and every victory solidified their place in the galaxy. The core's systems were no longer secure. Their alliances were crumbling. And in the shadows, the Rejected were waiting for their next move, ready to dismantle everything the galaxy thought it knew about power, fear, and survival. But even as the Rejected gained ground, they knew that the final battle, the one that would decide the fate of the galaxy, was still to come. The galaxy had not yet fully understood the scope of their challenge, and while Leora's forces were formidable, they were also keenly aware that no victory was ever permanent. The empires of the core were weak now, but they were not finished. They would come together eventually. Their desperation to defeat the Rejected would unite them in ways humanity couldn't yet predict. As the solstice cast its shadow over the galaxy, humanity's empire, the Rejected, had reached a turning point. They had not only survived against overwhelming odds, they had become the dominant force in a galaxy that had once ignored their cries for help. Now, with their roots entrenched in every corner of the galaxy, the Rejected were prepared for the inevitable clash with the remaining powers of the core. Captain Leora Ahern stood on the command bridge of the solstice, staring out into the endless void. The war was far from over, but there was a sense of finality in the air. The galaxy had been shaped by the decisions of those who thought they were untouchable, but now the Rejected had turned the tables. No longer would humanity be the prey. Now, they were the predators, and they had the galaxy in their sights. Lyra knew the upcoming battle would be the one that determined everything. The final confrontation that would either solidify humanity's place as the new rulers of the galaxy or see them pushed back into the dark corners they had once inhabited. The remaining empires of the core were gathering their fleets, calling on their strongest allies, uniting under one banner, desperate to rid the galaxy of this upstart empire. But they were mistaken. They didn't yet understand the true nature of the Rejected. The Rejected were not simply warriors. They were survivors. They had lived in the shadows for too long to be afraid of the light. Every defeat, every hardship, had been a lesson. Where the empires of the core relied on brute force and tradition, humanity's strength lay in its ability to adapt, to evolve, and to think differently. Every engagement, every battle, had forged the Rejected into something stronger than the sum of their parts. The solstice was now more than just a warship. It was a symbol of defiance, the beating heart of a rebellion that had spread like wildfire across the stars. The ship's singularity cannon, once a mere tool for destruction, had evolved into something much greater, a weapon of unparalleled precision and power. It was humanity's signature, the mark of their transformation from the oppressed to the oppressors. But the Rejected had learned not to rely solely on power. In the final days before the grand battle, Leora and her top strategists worked tirelessly, crafting a plan that would exploit every weakness the core's forces had. The fleets of the remaining empires, while mighty in their own right, lacked the cohesion and purpose that the Rejected had cultivated. And that, Leora knew, would be their undoing. A message had been sent throughout the galaxy, not in the form of a broadcast or a rallying cry, but as a singular act of defiance. The Rejected weren't here to beg for mercy. They had come to claim what was rightfully theirs. Their message was simple. We are not your equals. We are your successors. The core's response was swift, as their combined fleets took to the stars, preparing for the largest, most decisive confrontation the galaxy had ever witnessed. The remaining empires, led by the desperate rulers of the once mighty Dominion and the Targish Alliance, had no choice but to rally together. Fear and desperation filled their ranks. They could not allow the Rejected to rule. If they did, their empires would be broken, their power shattered. But the more they mobilized, the clearer it became that their unity was fragile, and cracks began to form in their grand coalition. Deep down, the core forces feared what they were about to face. Leora had no intention of making this an ordinary battle. Her plan was meticulous, designed to unbalance the core fleets and make them question everything they knew about warfare. The first phase was psychological, sending small, elite strike teams to sabotage vital systems, disrupting communication lines, and striking high-value targets in core-controlled space. It wasn't about winning these skirmishes. It was about creating a sense of chaos, of confusion. The Empire's soldiers, already uneasy, began to doubt their leadership, to question their strength. As the core fleet finally assembled for the final battle, the Rejected struck like lightning. Out of the darkness came the solstice, its hull gleaming with the cold light of distant stars. But it wasn't just the solstice that was present. The Rejected had assembled their fleet, a patchwork of ships once abandoned.